Hello. This teaching tip is called the Idea Spinner. My name is Scott Heinrichs. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Sports Medicine at Westchester University. Today I'd like to talk to you about a teaching tip that I've been using for the last several years to help gauge student learning and inform the teaching and learning process. The objective of this teaching tip is to promote active learning and engage students in learning course-related content. Specifically, this teaching tip is centered around formative assessment. When we're thinking about the teaching and learning process, there are two types of assessment: formative and summative assessment. Formative assessment, as a reminder, is assessment during the learning process. Summative assessment is the assessment that occurs after the learning is ended. Many of us are very familiar with summative assessment, as this is seen through exams, papers, presentations, and final grades. The Idea Spinner is really revolving around formative assessment. The most basic form of formative assessment is feedback. It's important for us as educators to consider using 1 to 2 types of formative assessment techniques in our class. Hopefully, at the end of this session, you'll be convinced to utilize the Idea Spinner as one of your formative assessment types. Other formative assessment types that we commonly see are typical question and answer periods of teacher and student using the old Socratic method. Two other types of formative assessment techniques that you could utilize are burning questions or muddiest points. Burning questions are questions asked by the student that they have yet to be answered from the teacher during lecture or at any other time during the course. Muddiest point, those are questions that are very unclear with regard to concepts the students are learning currently with the content. Formative assessment not only informs the instructor about the student learning, but also really improves the teaching process. Specifically, through these different types of techniques, the instructor can gauge whether or not students are learning, and also it'll allow the instructor to know if their teaching style has reached the students. Many of us have been teaching this content for several years, and we get used to teaching it a certain way. However, all learners are different. So by having formative assessment techniques, it allows us to better understand student learning and our teaching. The Idea Spinner. So first, you would create a virtual spinner by going to the following website. After you create a virtual spinner, which we will do in a minute, you'll divide your spinner into respective quadrants using higher order levels of Bloom's taxonomy, such as predict, summarize, evaluate. You could use lower levels such as identify, state, apply. After you've divided your spinner into respective quadrants, you should come to class prepared with 2 questions for each quadrant that align with the content that you're teaching for the day. Then, at the end of class, use the Idea Spinner to gauge the application of material to better inform you about student learning. So let's try the Idea Spinner right now. So here we are on the website. As you can see, this Idea Spinner is broken down by students, and you could keep all your students' names on here and have your class questions prepared, and based on where it spins, you ask that student a question. That's one way to use it. The other way is the way I just described. So what you would do is go down to Edit, and you would take away the student names, and then you would put your respective verbs. After you have your verbs, you want to save the list as currently shown, and then it'll ask you for a password. Then what you'll see here is a URL. What you'll do there next is take that URL, copy and paste it into your PowerPoint or your presentation software package that you use when you deliver your information to your students. And when you're ready to use it at the end of class, you'll just hyperlink out to this site. Then now you're ready to spin. Now you're ready to spin. So click to spin. It lands on Summarize. You can ask your question about Summarize, and then if you're done asking questions about Summarize, you can remove Summarize, and now leave the next 2 left to spin. You can call on students in groups, or you can call on students individually, and create nice healthy competition as it relates to the content you just taught. So how the Idea Spinner has impacted my teaching and learning process. One, it's allowed me to better gauge student learning, and it forced me to think about higher level types of questions prior to the exam. Generally, I would ask a higher level question here or there, but this really allowed me to critically think about the questions I want to ask at the end of a lecture to force students to think at those higher levels. Also, it enabled the students to think at higher levels. It put them more on the spot to really try to apply and evaluate the material in ways that they hadn't always done in the past. And finally, the idea spinner creates a healthy competitive atmosphere to monitor student learning, but also inform my teaching. Because if I saw, or as I saw students consistently getting certain questions wrong around content at the end of the class, maybe it's not the students, but it's my teaching, and I have to go back and think about how can I improve my teaching strategies to align with that content to better gauge or better inform student learning. So I hope you enjoyed this teaching tip around the idea spinner. Hopefully you'll consider its use to improve the teaching and learning process in your courses. Thank you.